A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers. Welcome to another edition of Let's Talk. We are delighted to be with you today as we share on our continuing discussion on aging and the psychological impact on the same. Today, we are pleased to continue that very intriguing discussion we had last week. It was truly an amazing discussion. And I'm so very happy that Chaplain Neve George is with us again. If you are joining us for the first time, I would like to just let you know that our guest for this afternoon, he was with us last week. Our guest is Pastor Neve George. He is currently a PhD candidate at the School of Health and Medicine at Lancaster University. He is a graduate from the University of Baltimore School of Pharmacy with a master's degree in palliative care. He's an ordained minister and a clinical chaplain. Pastor George served as the head of the chaplaincy services at the the head of chaplaincy and health outreach department at the community hospital in Trinidad. That is a Seventh-day Adventist institution. He holds a graduate. In addition to his master's degree, he holds graduate certificates in denominational chaplaincy from Loma Linda University, as well as psycho-oncology and physiological first aid and trauma intervention. He is a trained clinical pastoral educator, and he is an active member of the Loma Linda University's behavioral health trauma team. He has been for the last 10 or so years providing psychological first aid and training interventions throughout the Caribbean. And we are so delighted to have him with us this afternoon. Pastor George, welcome back to Let's Talk.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be back, Dr. Greene. Happy Sabbath to you.
We have had some very positive reviews, feedback from our last program, what we shared last week. And by the way, folks, I want to let you know that next week, we're also going to be having a special guest. We are one program away from concluding this very important discussion on aging. And how can we end a discussion like this without giving attention to the area of dementia? And I want you to know that next week, we're going to be having a psychiatrist, just an amazing lady who will share with us on aspects relating to dementia. You know, we'll talk about Alzheimer's. We will talk about some other things, but you need to be here next week. In the meantime, we are here with Pastor Chaplain George. And last week, when we ended, we spoke about the whole matter of why it is important to prepare for this whole matter of aging. I want to begin our discussion this afternoon. You know, last week we spent some time talking about various things relating to aging. You clarified that age is not just a number. We looked at the whole concept of the benefits of believing in Christ and how that helps us with the aging process. We also considered, to some extent, the impact of the challenges, rather, for those who are responsible for taking care of the older folks. We're going to talk about that a little more. But before we do, Chaplain George, some persons, unfortunately, see a program like this as not sabbatical. They say it's not Sabbath material. Why is aging a good topic for the Christian community to consider?
Well, Dr. Greene, on many levels. Firstly, practically now, in many of our churches, more than 50% of our population comprise of people who are over 45, or even over 50. Globally, we have an aging population. And so as spiritual leaders, as members, as we minister to persons around us, we have to be aware of who our audience is and what the challenges that they face. One of the basic principles about the Bible is that God meets men and women where they are, not only in terms of how Jesus spoke through parables, but he was even focused on his audience by meeting their needs based on where they were in their journey. And so in this age in which we live, increasingly as a pastor, ministers, as the church ministers to his congregation and community, we have to be relevant to the people that we are meeting. With that side, I want to add the fact is that many years ago, visitation was a very important part of ministry, visiting persons in their homes. The pandemic has changed that paradigm, but more and more we're seeing that senior citizens, as a result of what has been happening with the pandemic, found themselves experiencing loneliness and isolation as a direct result of what's going on. And these are often members of our congregation. So we need to know how to meet.
That's very important. It is a very significant thing when we can provide care and comfort. Physical presence sometimes makes a big difference. I am visiting on the island of Nevis. That is one of the territories of the South Leeward Conference. And I remember this morning when driving to church, the young man said, you know, it is such a joy to be able to see you in person again after so long a time. He said, you know, we see you often on Zoom, but to know that you're here in person is going to make such a significant difference. And so, you know, I think given awareness to the need for us to relate to people who have made their significant contributions is meaningful, definitely. There was a time when in my pastoring, and interestingly, when I worked here on Nevis, I remember that one Sabbath we determined that we were going to ask a certain gentleman. We started involving a cross-section of persons in the worship program on Sabbaths. And this particular gentleman, he was an older gentleman. I wasn't even aware of the fact that he owned a jacket. But we did ask him to do the pastoral prayer that Sabbath morning, the prayer for the midday hour. Yes. And he was at church 9 a.m. He was well dressed in his three-piece suit, and you could see that sense of pride on his face. You know, it almost as though he was saying, at least, I can do something. They have not forgotten me. I am still meaningful. I'm still useful. So very important indeed. Definitely.
Yes. I want to add as well, Pastor, that there is something about sitting in the home of a senior person. They, as we say, they are old school. And even though we have a pandemic going on, they still feel that they need to be visited. They need to have somebody come and bless them in their homes. As a pastor, I would meet individuals in my office where I'm here at work. But I found that when I'm in the home, sitting in the living room, chatting with the persons, there's a different level of communication. And senior persons want to receive the blessing of their pastor. They want to know that someone can come to their house and pray in their homes. And we have to remember this is how they think, and we have to be able to meet them, being mindful of the pandemic, but still being mindful of meeting where they are.
Thank you so much, Chaplain George. Now, this afternoon, we're going to be talking about the whole matter of coping with loneliness, which is a really important aspect of, if we are discussing this whole matter of the impact of aging on individuals. But just before we get there, we have spoken a lot about the individual who is aging. What about those around him or her? What about the caregivers? How does understanding the psychological dynamics of aging beneficial to those who have to deal with those who are getting old?
Again, there are various layers. In terms of being able to meet their need, if you understand what your loved one is going through, then you better be able to demonstrate patience. You'll be better able to demonstrate tact. We talked last week that sometimes senior persons may be experiencing certain types of chronic diseases. And these diseases may fall into various categories. We talked about the whole question of the rapid decline, referring to cancer-related diseases, and the intermittent decline referring to organ failure, and then frailty finally, looking at dementia-related illnesses. If you're aware of what your loved one is going through, then you're better able to plan effectively and you're better able, even in your own self-care, how to manage your own health, even as you support them. For example, someone who is caring for a dementia patient is caring for someone who basically will be living very long ill. Dementia patients, essentially, it's a mental health challenge. But the other organs, the other parts of the person will be very healthy. So you may find someone with dementia living for a very, very long time, but because of that particular ailment, they are unable to communicate. They may be behaving in particular ways. Caregiver for that individual is going to be caring for this person over a very long period of time, and it will be highly stressful. Understanding the impact of dementia, as you mentioned in the program next week, will help this person now. How do I care for this loved one? And when they behave in a particular way, how can I best approach? And that person will be completely different to, let's say, someone who's dealing with a intermittent decline patient, someone with organ failure. So understanding what your loved one is going through can help you prepare not only how the quality of care you provide for them, but also help you to manage your own stress level. Because caregiver burnout is a very serious thing. In fact, Pastor, I have known of individuals, Dr. Greene, who have actually been caring for loved ones and died and left the person they've been caring for behind because of stress, because of burnout, because of lack of being able to handle the intervention. So knowledge is power. We need to understand what our loved one is going through and how best to manage our own care, even as we care for them.
Now, I just want to, just for a minute or two, if we can go back to talk about the whole matter of caregiver burnout. I have had individuals say to me, listen, I've been taking care of my mother, and listen, frankly, I want to give up. Sometimes I feel like she's a wicked person. The things she says to me, she can be so critical, etc. And that seems to be a very high stress situation, because here is somebody who you are taking care of, and when they begin to curse you out and say things about you that are not really very nice, very stressful indeed. I mean, understanding what they're going through can help. And I think, if I understand that this is a process, this is a part of the package, then I can prepare for it, at least mentally. When I am not aware that this is what is happening, I may begin to think that this person is just spiteful. So we are really indeed talking about a high stress situation. And that you mentioned burnout. Maybe if you can just expand a little bit, because there may be individuals listening who have been going through that experience and maybe wondering, why is this so stressful for me?
Yeah, so self-care is key to this. When you're caring for someone who's seriously ill, particularly a dementia patient, you're in for the very long run. And if you are not filling your cup caring for you, you cannot give what you do not have. And I often love to use the Good Samaritan story as an illustration. I want each caregiver this afternoon to think of themselves as being their own Good Samaritan. But I also want you to see yourself as the gentleman who was robbed and who's fought on the side. When we are caring for persons, we incur injury. We refer to it as compassion fatigue. It is as a result of listening to the hurts and pains of others, but also engaging in the suffering of the one that you're caring for. And you're incurring personal injury in yourself. Like the Good Samaritan story, sometimes we're like the priest and the Levi. We're so busy paying the bills, we're busy getting the medication, we're busy cooking and doing all the things, that even though we are suffering, we're on the ground, we keep passing ourselves by on the other side. And sometimes we want someone to come and say, let me help you, or we want someone to assist us to relieve the suffering. But quite frankly, we have to be our own Good Samaritans and understand that we need to come aside, as Jesus says, rest a while, refill our cup, and return. Let me tell you a story quickly. Many years ago, I met this young lady. Her husband had a major accident and was paralyzed, waist down. And she would come home as a teacher to take up her second shift, which was to care for her husband. One afternoon coming home, she saw an old friend and decided she would sit with her for a while to chat and just laugh and to relax. one of her family members saw her and chastised her later on in the day for not coming home to care for her husband. And she had to say to that individual, unless I am caring for me and I'm in a good place, I will not be able to provide the kind of support my husband needs to get. And
Mhm.
so don't feel guilty if you take a break. Don't feel guilty if today you want to ask another family member to deputize for you and just go to the beach and relax. If you're not taking care of you, you're going to experience burnout because there's a cost for caring, but you cannot give what you don't have.
Very important, and I do know too that there are lots of folks who don't understand the concept of burnout.
Yes.
Some people tell folks they're lazy, that's why you're not performing. But when we understand that this is something that happens to us when we overreach, so to speak,
Yes.
and that it is really important for us to take time and nurture ourselves so that we can be more effective in what we do. But I do want to move on. I want to get to the aspect of one of the things that is almost a natural result of people living longer or getting older. One of the considerations of aging is the matter of adjusting to the loss of friends. Over the years, an old or aging person can see his or her circle of friends diminish significantly. Some die, some migrate, others are no longer mobile. And so this individual is kind of cut off from the persons who they are close to. And we know how important relationship is. So my question to you is, how does loneliness impact people?
So loneliness is described as a distressing feeling that comes as a result of being alone or separated. And as a result of that detachment from individuals, the loss of relationships, change in circumstances, many persons experience emotional pain. It's an unpleasant feeling that comes as a result of having loss taking place around you. One person described it as how much you hurt as a human being. So you're experiencing this pain of loss, you're experiencing this hurt. And as a result of that, if this continues for a long period of time, eventually it begins to affect not just your emotional response to things, but also your physical. Remember, we said last week that age is not only chronological, as you mentioned, but biological. So
Mhm.
your biology begins to be affected. So research has shown that most persons who are alone are more likely to experience hypertension, obesity, heart disease, depression, um, cognitive decline. So you may find that persons suddenly begin to neglect themselves because of their loneliness. These could be some of the signs. There could be lack of motivation to do things. Some persons have a loss of energy. They begin to have a decline in interest in social activities because of the losses. I remember chatting with a senior lady, 98 years of age, and she said to me at that time, all my friends are dead. Why it is I want to continue living? you know, she's not in touch with, she has no social connection in the present. What she grew up understanding and know is no longer there. And in this, feeling this sense of loneliness, the will to live and to go on is lost. So you would find these things taking place. You may also observe an increase in persons using hot baths or showers. And ironically, Doc, that is for them to feel a sense of warmth. It brings calm, it's therapeutic, but it is a subtle indicator of feeling an absence of warmth in their lives. And that's interesting research. There's an increase in activities from one extreme to another. So you may find this person either just isolating themselves, or they may want to go out and shop a lot or buy things a lot. Senior person, their loved ones may even find them calling them more frequently. So these are subtle little signs to look at. But because of the loss, there's a desire to compensate for this. But it
This,
eventually begins to affect health.
this is very interesting. I mean, you're mentioning some things that we can pick up to suggest to us that, hey, this person is going through a phase here. And as you were speaking, my mind was searching and I was thinking, imagine that here is an individual who has lost his or her close associations, whether through migration or through death or hospitalization or whatever the case may be, and whose children have also moved away, so that it can be a significant loss, that void, to fill it. And if this individual now picks up the telephone and is calling a son or a daughter 2 times a day, and they become disgusted and say, "Mommy, I spoke to you this morning, why are you calling me again?" That can be a challenge for that old person, can't it?
Yes, it can be very distressing. And so some folks begin to think of themselves as a burden. Sometimes you hear a person saying, I don't want to trouble them. I feel as a burden. I don't want to burden anyone. But in reality, that is a warning shot. That is a sign that it's a cry for help. As well, when persons are lonely, this whole question of cognitive decline that we mentioned before is something very serious. They may begin to forget. Because they're not communicating with people around them, that normal social interaction affects their capacity to function in certain ways. So they may forget to pay bills. They may forget to take their medication. They may be cooking and they may walk away and leave the gas on. They put on the gasoline and they forgot. And so it's not just a case of, okay, this person has early dementia, but it's because of the fact that they're by themselves. Gradually, the mind is not alert as before. And so sometimes you will hear senior people even talking to themselves and responding. They're trying to compensate for the loss. And the Bible talks about this whole question of not forsaking the assembling of ourselves. And as I was thinking about this as you spoke, the church has a corporate responsibility as well to reach out to the elderlies in this form and ensure that they come into these settings for interaction, because that in itself is therapeutic and supports their mental health. As simple as the one session coming to church one day a week is, it supports mental health.
Very interesting indeed. Now before we move on, a question or two here. One of our viewers is saying a lot of caregivers die before their old patients. So you stated that this afternoon. The person is asking, why is this so when they are so busy doing things?
Exactly for what we had said before. Very often persons are so engaged in caring that they neglect their own self-care. And sometimes, because of the age gap, sometimes you have elderly persons taking care of elderly persons. And the person who's caring for the loved one, they themselves have some form of serious illness, whether it's hypertension, diabetes, and they're neglecting themselves. So they're ensuring that their loved one has a meal, but they're not eating on time, but their loved one that they're caring for is eating on time. So self-care directly affects not only your quality of life, but also your length of life. So the rule is, be self-compassionate. Care for you as focused as you are caring for the person that you're providing the intervention for. Because you can burn the candles, as we say, on both ends.
Often when I travel and the stewardess is going through the ritual before the airline takes off, and they say, if we get into whatever situation and there's a need for oxygen, the mask will fall down. They always say, please remember to put on your mask before you put on those in your care. And as you spoke, that came to me because, I'm now thinking that a mother could be so busy concentrating and putting on masks for her children that she forgets to put on her own mask. And that can lead to some serious consequences. So the idea of taking care of yourself before you take care of others, it's not selfish, it's sensible.
Exactly. In addition to that, Dr. Greene, family dynamics also impacts. Sometimes we have large families, but when the parents reach a particular age, you may find just one person who is carrying the weight of responsibility to care for the parents. It's a very important, where it is possible, that the caregiving intervention is shared, and no one person is allowed, because they volunteer, to carry the full weight. And that's where the family must come together, have meetings, and plan to share the load. And very often I find in many cases, things happen in the home and you just have this one person who's carrying the weight, and eventually they suffer as a result of it.
Well, that is a very important issue that you're raising there. Um, I encounter people all the time, and they say, I have the burden of taking care of my parents all by myself. And
Yes.
sometimes I ask, but you have other relatives. And they say, well, that's a long story. Now, I heard you say just now that it is important when you have a situation like this for persons to call family meetings together and for them to share the burden. I wonder if you can just go that over, because this is a real issue. This is a serious issue. And I know this because I know of a few individuals who have the responsibility of taking care of their aged parents. And this is the cry: I am burdened and my other relatives are just free. So if you could just share that again, that would be helpful.
Yes, but it also goes back to the family dynamics. And this is where parenting comes in.
Mhm.
If, when as parents, we do not create a particular culture within our family where we teach our children to care, we bring up values of, family support, family, centeredness. When persons get older, though if those values are not a part of them, then it's hard for them to respond. And so this is a little message for parents now. The word of God really says, train up a child in the way that they should go. Because when families are not together and they're dysfunctional, you may find that this will happen in the latter stages when their relationships weren't healthy between children and parents coming up. You find this happen. But a general rule is, when we realize that our parents are a particular age, we have aging persons in our family, the family needs to sit down and begin planning ahead and begin making decisions of how we're going to do this. Is it that we are going to transfer our loved one to a care home and we come together financially to provide the support? Or is it that we are going to decide we're going to share the responsibilities among ourselves? But there must be healthy communication and planning in order for this to work.
Now, there's another, well, not so much of a question, but a request. Someone is asking, we spoke about this, compassion, fatigue and burnout, and somebody's asking if you can explain the symptoms of burnout in compassion fatigue.
All right, so compassion fatigue, as I said, it comes as a result of not being able to manage these emotions that you're experiencing. So you may find that someone, all of a sudden, you begin to feel constantly stressed and anxious. You may find yourself feeling a sense of hopelessness. No one cares. I'm doing all of this by myself. There may be even a loss of a sense of pleasure, wanting to do things that will make you laugh. So you're going into a depressive state. Some persons experience a general pervasive negative attitude. And this individual, you have noticed, will be very positive, trying to work things out. Now, everything that you share with them, they're very negative. There's withdrawal, there's loneliness, and eventually there's a development of mistrust. Because I'm thinking that no one likes me, because everyone is allowing me to carry this burden by myself, I begin to distrust individuals around me. So as a result of that, someone experiencing compassion fatigue, you may find there being a lot of interpersonal conflict, increasingly with other members of the family in the home and even at work, because of this anxious, distrustful nature that they're experiencing. Impatience, irritability, moodiness, forgetfulness. So, Dr. Greene, I know this has never happened to you, but there are folks who will put their glasses on top of their head and be looking all around the house with the glasses, and it's right on top of their forehead because they're so stressed and they become accident prone. So, all of these are some of the factors that are early warning signs that you're suffering from what we call CF, or compassion fatigue. even substance abuse. It may not necessarily be drugs, illegal drugs, but probably you're taking pills to sleep, you're taking pills to be alert, you are using energy drinks, whether it's Lion or Battery, some of the things we have here in the Caribbean to keep you going. And then for persons who are observing you, they'll begin to see that you're exhibiting poor self-care. So those are some early signs that this caregiver is really, really not coping well, and they're beginning to develop compassion.
A very useful information. I trust that the folks have given attention to what you just shared. Again, this is so relevant because, like I said, it is not something we're making up. It is something that we see happening around us from time to time. But we do have to move on because half our time is gone already. So let's go. Now, you mentioned the whole concept of loneliness. Now, I suppose that loneliness will have different impact on persons depending on the personality of the individual. There's some persons, especially, I noticed during the COVID pandemic lockdown, some persons were able to cope a lot more than others because some persons are naturally introverted. And so if you take me, for example, I did not mind the lockdown at all. In fact, it was enjoyable, quite frankly, because I'm naturally introverted. On the other hand, I know of individuals who, whenever they got, I know of this particular individual who said, I heard such and such a place is open. I'm driving down there to pay my bills because they want to talk to people.
Yes.
But there is a difference between loneliness and being alone. And I would like you to speak to that for a minute.
Yes. Let me just add, though, even introverted persons need to be connected and to relate to persons.
That's correct.
But yes, so as we mentioned earlier, loneliness is a feeling, a distressing feeling as a result of being alone or separate. Alone, or what we call social isolation, is a lack of social contact. So it is possible for someone to be alone but not be lonely, as you just shared with your own experience. And then you have cases where you can be in a crowd and you have a lot of persons around you. You are in an environment that's very populated and feel alone because you're not feeling connected. I think connection, healthy relationship is the key here because you can be in a home and you don't feel connected to your children, to your grandchildren, to the people who are around you, even though there is a lot of movement and activity. With that said, naturally, as we age, we begin to have what we call life reviews. Most time you speak to an elderly person, they begin to tell you about the old days. They share what has happened to them in the past because the mind is naturally beginning to have a life review. What is beautiful about that is as you talk about the old days, it is therapeutic because it allows people to relive experiences and even experience some of the emotions, pleasant emotions that they had in the past. So I don't know, Dr. Greene, maybe you've been walking down the street one day and a song started to play that you heard when you were maybe 18 or 19 or 15 or 16. And all the emotions that you used to experience, you experienced at that time, you felt them in this moment. That is the same thing that happens to senior folks when they talk about the old days. And that is a therapeutic, and it helps support them and nurtures them in this time of their life. So when they're not able to have healthy relationships to converse and to talk and to give meaning to their experiences, it brings this distressing feeling we're referring to as loneliness. So the key thing here is healthy relationships, not just having people around.
And talking about senior folks, I remember again, perhaps because I'm a Nevis, I'm making so many references to Nevis, but I remember when I started ministering here, one of the things I did as a pastor, somebody reminded me that that's over 25 years ago. And one of the things I did back then is that on Tuesday mornings, there was a little prayer meeting. Some of the senior folks used to come to the church and pray. And I started taking the church bus and carrying them to these old estates around the island. And for me back then, I was amazed that the senior folks looked forward to this so much, and they began to tell me the history of what, this old sugar plantation, how it used to function. And now that you're speaking, I'm saying, yes, now I understand that, as they shared those things, they were reliving those experiences. And that was so meaningful to them, to the point where the time came when, as the pastor, I couldn't do anything wrong in the church. Those old folks were on my side all the time, but that is an important element. So just going and talking with them and rehashing all experiences seem to be very meaningful. That's insightful indeed.
Let me just add something, some signs so that viewers can be mindful as well. If you notice that your loved one's appetite is changing, they're either eating less, or they're showing disinterest in food, or they're overeating, that can be a sign. If you find that they're getting angry a lot, or they're non-responsive. So sometimes you speak to them and there's no response. They're just sitting there and they're just staring at you. That is something to look at. Or their sleeping patterns have changed. Those are some little signs to say, hey, I need to take more time to be with my mom or my dad. These are little warning signs.
Interesting, really interesting. Now, I know a few older persons. We're talking about this matter of loneliness, right? I know a few older persons who choose to get married again. I even know of persons in their 80s and 90s who choose to marry again. Sometimes the children really don't see the need for this, and sometimes it causes tension in the family. Now, let's look at this from two different perspectives. First, the older individual who desires to get married. Might it be a matter of the need for companionship, romance, or both? I don't know what you can share on this one, but help me here, please.
Well, I would say both. When we think about romance, sometimes we think of sex, sexual intercourse, but there's also the aspect of intimacy. But companionship is very important. Some persons don't want to be alone or to feel alone, especially if they had a rich experience with their former spouse. That sense of support, they want that sense of support. Actually, there was a study done some years ago among about 500,000 persons that showed that individuals who stayed single lived 10 years less. They cut 10 years off of their lifespan by remaining single. That may not always be for everyone, but for these individuals, they found. But generally, companionship is important. Having someone at your own age that you can talk with and communicate with. But I want to put a note on this. It is important when persons lose loved ones that they do not make quick changes. Sometimes you find that someone may have lost a loved one, and within 6 months, they get married again. The problem with that, the danger of that, is that you have not grieved sufficiently. You have not been able to work through the loss, and now you're getting into a relationship with someone else. It is unfair to you, but it's also unfair to the other party, because they're marrying to someone who is still very much emotionally married to the deceased. I have attended programs where I have seen persons get up. Grief sessions, I've conducted grief sessions, and persons have got up to talk about their grief. And they're talking about their dead loved one, and their present spouse is sitting next to them, and they're crying, and they're totally overwhelmed. And you realize this person has not yet moved on, but they're now married. So there needs to be balance with this. And so we normally encourage persons at least take a year, take a few months, and work through your grief experience before you jump into another. Another aspect is that you have to be mindful that now you're joining into a new relationship. There are questions of financial arrangements. Even the children, their response may be as a result of assets that this present party has, and there may be questions of trust. This new person coming in, are they getting married to my dad because of dad, or they marry dad because he has these assets. So communication, conversation again is important, but do not rush. Take your time. So we normally say do not make major changes immediately after you've lost a loved one. Give yourself time to heal and to be in a better place.
I think this is one of the reasons why it is so important, especially as, we're talking about the marriage issue here, for persons to not just want to go to the courthouse and get married, but to get a qualified marriage counselor to prepare you adequately.
Yes.
And I suppose some older individuals may say, I've been married for 40 years, for 45 years. I know what it takes. But these are some of the areas that they need to give attention to.
Certainly.
And you mentioned the aspect of the financial arrangements. So you may have a man or woman who died and the spouse is left with significant property. And the children hearing that he or she is getting married again may begin to think, oh, she wants to come and take my parents' hard work and that kind of thing. So sometimes it's a bit challenging. But if I may, go ahead if you're going to make a comment.
Yeah, as well, the age gap. I've noticed as well that in some cases you'll find senior persons getting married to persons who are middle-aged or sometimes very young. And that too can be an alarm bell. And so I love the point that you brought forward about premarital counseling. The age gap can cause a lot of challenges in terms of values, in terms of romantic or sexual needs. It's something that we need to be mindful of, that we don't rush into.
Most definitely. Now, there's another aspect of this marriage thing, with these senior folks getting married. Some of the younger relatives say that, mommy is getting married soon after, or daddy is getting married soon after to this person, so little time has passed. So they now conclude that they must have had a relationship before the other parent died. And they think that this is the real issue. They come to that conclusion, and you can't dissuade them from saying, yes, if they were not involved romantically before, then they could not have been getting married. Is that always the case?
No, it's not always the case. And very often it is the person trying to cope, feeling as if I get into another relationship, somehow it will help me to overcome what I'm going through. So sometimes persons rush in because of that desire to escape the pain and emotional experiences. But in another sense as well, sometimes the children are responding because they themselves are not ready to move on. They view the sudden change by their parents as meaning, as you said, that love relationship was not there, and they see it as symbolic of the strength or the lack of strength of their family. And again, this is where family values, family relationship comes into play. I remember sitting probably about 3 or 4 months ago, sitting in a home of this gentleman who had lost his wife. And we invited his daughters into the home. And even though the spouse, the mom, had passed, they had all cried, they had all gone to the funeral. They never spoke to each other about how they felt about mom no longer being around. They just assumed that, okay, everybody is grieving and everyone needed their space. But they never spoke about it to each other. And in that session, as they began to share, they began to see the viewpoint of the others. The daughter did not share with her father how she felt, or cried in front of him because she wanted to be strong for him. But he, in turn, felt that he was not an adequate father because his daughter was not coming to him. So I'm sharing this to say that when we're at this crossroad where there's loss and there's change in the home, it is important where family members can sit down and openly share with each other create a safe space for communication so that we will not have miscommunication or misperceptions of actions, and probably come to an understanding as to how we can move forward as family members, better support each
I think that as we discuss aging and the impact of loss and loneliness, etc., you're bringing out a very important point there, that understanding the dynamics of grief is perhaps something that our senior folks and their relatives need to be exposed to. Likewise, because people react differently to loss. People react differently to these kinds of stressful situations, and what if one does not grieve properly, it can create some lingering effects.
Yeah, so as well, so we touched on financial planning a few minutes ago, but again, the whole question of um, having a will done early, sitting down and allocating resources, talking about medical care. So two persons are coming together now to get married, in their senior years, most likely health will be an issue. Sitting down and having a conversation about, how we're going to support each other financially through that experience in the latter stages of our life. Talking about how we are going to present ourselves to your children or to my children. This is a blended family now. These things people need to sit down and think about carefully before they enter into any marital arrangement. So I will encourage anyone listening today, reach out to your pastor, reach out to a counselor. Don't just race into a relationship because you're trying to escape loneliness or you're trying to cope with the grief and the loss of someone who was very significant in your life who has passed.
And Pastor George, while we're talking about senior folks in this regard, this is also very useful counsel to any individual who loses a spouse.
Yes.
Even for that matter, maybe not even a spouse, but a sweetheart, a fiance. There's some persons who, they break a relationship today and 2 weeks from now they're in another relationship and they haven't really dealt with the loss. And that can, if you marry the wrong person, or let's say if you marry for the wrong reason, it can result in a lifetime of misery.
Yes.
So indeed, very wise counsel. But now let me move on to an area that, at least in the Caribbean context, can be very challenging. Last week, we spoke about preparation for aging. I want to believe that no one can know for sure how he or she will react when faced with the situation of, the reality of the fact that he or she is getting older. A few years back, there was a belief that your children should take care of you when you get old. Depending on the cultural orientation, some persons believe that if one does not take care of an aged parent or take an aged parent into his or her home physically, that it was a disgrace. These days, and I grew up in Antigua, and there's a government home, and if people hear, oh, such and such a person is gone to the Fines Institute, and these days, senior citizens' homes are becoming more popular, and people would.
I think I lost you for a moment, Dr. Greene. I think that indeed we seem to have had a little technical challenge there. But yes, Dr. Greene, I agree with you. I agree with you that indeed sometimes there is this perception that because I have sent my loved one to a senior home, I don't necessarily care. Yes, we just lost you for a second.
Yeah, we as I said, I'm in Nevis, and we have power outage. This is not good publicity for Nevis, but that happens. I was making the point. I'm getting a hotspot from my cell phone, so I hope it's clear enough. But I was making the point that, you know, putting a person in a senior citizens home some years back would be considered to be a bad thing, a terrible thing. These days we have working couples, and having an aged parent to supervise can prove challenging. I want to talk to the issue of the elderly care homes from the perspective of the elderly and also from the perspective of the child. I had a discussion with just the other day, and I told the person I was talking to that when I get to the stage where I realize I can no longer adequately take care of myself, I hope to check myself into an elderly care home. The person had a challenge with that. Now, I see this as good preparation and planning. I do have children, but I think it might be a burden for them to have their careers and their own children's education and having to deal with, you know, sometimes they may not even be qualified to provide the kind of care that I may need. So what is your perspective on this? You know, the matter of putting a person in a senior's home. What's your perspective on this?
So it depends on, again, unique to your own family culture, and you use that word. Um, there are some families uh, who will make the decision that we have the facilities and we have the capability, and based on how we were raised, that we would keep mom or dad home and we will hire someone to come here to take care of them. There are other families based on finances or even culture, or even their work life, as you just mentioned, may not be able to do so. But what is important, as you just mentioned, is the whole question of planning from early. What will happen down the road? And begin exploring the possibilities. It is always good to start early. Don't wait until you reach at a particular point and you don't have things in place to make the adjustment. Sometimes we do not have these conversations because we are uncomfortable with them. We are afraid that it will bring up certain things in our conversation making that we are not ready to address. But to procrastinate, I think it leads to our downfall at the end of the day. But I'll agree, if anyone is reflecting on their own life, you're looking at your family structure, you're looking at the culture of your home, and you feel that the best thing would be to go a particular direction, then begin articulating that to your family. Begin planning towards it. Don't wait for the last moment to do so. Because you have financial factors to take into consideration, you have emotional factors to take into consideration. You have the whole dynamics that some members of your family may agree or disagree. So if you begin the conversation early, other ideas can come that probably you had never thought about. But at the end of the day, your quality of life care will be enriched because you started the conversation now. So I would agree with you, Dr. Greene, in your decision.
Okay, wonderful. Our time is almost up. We have just about 5 more minutes. So let's just see if we can wrap this up now. I know situations where children collect Social Security or NIS for their parents and do not provide the proper care. That is unfortunate. This, I believe, is a normal, well, let's say this is a moral issue. It's not a good thing. What, however, of the other side of the coin, where a father, let's say, does not provide for his or her children during his or her childhood, and now that the person is grown and seeking to make a life of his or her own, the neglectful parent presents himself as needing help. How do you counsel the child in a case like this?
So there is no one right fit for every circumstance, but there are basic principles. And this way I go back to the word of the Lord. I go back to scripture. The Bible counsels us, I think in Exodus 20:12, the word of God tells us that we ought to honor our parents, honor thy mother and thy father. Sometimes we find ourselves in relationships that weren't healthy, that weren't balanced. And you may find yourself in a situation now where your estranged father or mom shows up and is seeking your support. You may not be in a position to provide support in the full extent, but the basic principle is this: regardless of what has happened, you need to honor your parents in whatever way that it is within your ability to do so. So you may not be able to take them in, fully finance, do all the things that you may have wanted to. But I believe that at the end of the day, we are Christians. We are persons seeking to follow after certain principles that are biblical. And so it is important that we honor them to whatever it is we are capable of doing in our care for them.
So the idea is that even in a situation where your parents may not have been faithful in their responsibilities when you're growing up, you should not try to be even with them, but show compassion and concern and love and care. Very important. As we talk about aging, as we talk about this matter of the spiritual impact of aging on one's life and quality of life, what we want is for individuals at every level to have a significant quality of life. And that's why, friends, we have taken the time to do this series and to talk with Chaplain George, because we want you to be able to appreciate and understand the dynamics that are involved. Pastor George, in a while, I'm going to give you 2 minutes just to wrap up. Our time is just about expired, but I want you to share your closing thoughts. We don't have much more time. And I want to truly thank you for being such an excellent presenter and helping us through some of these very challenging issues. But friends, again, next week is going to be our final session on this series with aging. After that, we're going to be next week. I'll tell you what we have lined up for you coming up. But we want you to be present next week, because we're going to be talking about dementia, its various phases. We're going to be having as our special guest a very qualified psychiatrist who is going to be talking us through some very important issues. But for now, Pastor George, as we look at the whole matter of how we relate to our aging loved ones, how those who are listening, who are at that particular age, having to deal with the challenges of lack of mobility and sometimes a stroke, and you're there, you're conscious, but you can't move around, etc. What are your closing thoughts? What do you want to share that you think people need to hear?
Because we live in a world of sin, there will be aging, and for many cases, unless Jesus comes very soon, there will be death. But the quality of life we live while here is hinged upon primary relationship with God. The Word of God says, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, and God will give it to us. Aging is about adjustment. But God can give you wisdom if you walk with Him. If as a family unit, we walk with Christ, we study the Word, and we plan ahead as a result of His intervention in our lives, we can plan not only for end of life, but we can plan for eternity. And I think that is our ultimate goal, to ensure that we have a quality of life as we come to the end of life, so that our minds will be prepared for the New Jerusalem to come. Because this world is not all Dr. Greene. We're looking for a city whose builder and maker is God.
Amen. Thank you so much. Well said, well put together. We're very grateful again for your contribution. Friends, that's all the time we have for today. We wish you God's blessing. My desire for all of you is that you will stay young. But again, as Pastor George said, we live in a world that has been impacted by sin, and we know only too well that things that can go wrong will go wrong. But in the meantime, give attention to how you take care of yourself, what you eat, how you exercise, the self-care that our chaplain spent so much time talking about, so that as you age, your quality of life can be meaningful. That's all the time we have for you today on Let's Talk. We invite you to join us next Sabbath and every Sabbath at 3 p.m. as we discuss some significant issue in the life of the Christian. May God bless you.